Welcome to This Week in Local, a Localogy podcast featuring lively conversations about the local digital ecosystem, hosted by Localogy analysts Mike Boland and Charles Laughlin.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to This Week in Local. I'm Charles Laughlin. I'm a senior analyst with Localogy, here with my colleague Mike Boland. Mike, how are you?
Hi, Charlie. Doing well.
Great. So why don't you talk to us about some things you've been seeing out there?
Yeah, so one of the sort of headlines from this week that I thought was interesting was drive-up only grocery store. So it's sort of a new concept that is based on an old concept. So, this takes the sort of curbside pickup option that we all know well. You do your online shopping. It's an e-commerce type experience. You put things in a cart. You go to Target or Safeway or Albertsons or Stop and Shop or whatever, and they, you tell them you're there and they bring it out to your trunk, right? Nothing new there. This company called Addie's, or that's actually the brand name of the grocery store. It's a Norwood, Massachusetts store, just raised $10 million seed round to essentially become the first drive-up only grocery store. So I guess that's the distinction. It's not sort of an option. You got people running around in the store. You got people picking up. This is just pickup. And their first location is a 22,000 square foot store, offers 4,500 products, all the typical grocery categories, everything from dairy to deli and produce, etc. And, again, it's not new, but the new part is that it's the only option. And that sort of has advantages and disadvantages that I've been sort of looking at. The advantages are mostly sort of logistical and expense wise. So you don't have checkout aisles, you don't have a customer service desk, you don't have all of the sort of what I call the art of merchandising, which is like product placement in the store and end caps and, free samples for your microwave, pizza bites or whatever. Like all of that goes away. As do some of the sort of in-store personnel and human capital you need. You don't need someone to man the deli counter. So there are a lot of sort of cost advantages. And this is very analogous. As you hear me talk about this, one thing that might come to mind is it's analogous to the sort of cloud kitchen model and ghost kitchen model that we've spent a lot of time talking about on this show and writing about. So it's a lot of those sort of customer service types of costs that just go away. Another example of an advantage here is that when you don't have customers, which tend to sort of make a mess of store aisles. I used to work at Home Depot, and this was quite an annoyance when you're in charge of an aisle and you got to restock and reset the aisle at the end of the day. It's a lot less onerous when you don't have customers that have just gone through the aisle like a tornado all day. Another quick sort of advantage is that the store personnel can be freed up to work on sort of warehousing type stuff, stocking, delivery, fulfillment, as opposed to dealing with customers. And that can be everything from pesky questions of, which aisle do you keep the sauerkraut, but also if you think about it, with no customers wandering the aisles, they can be freed up to use more effective machinery. Forklifts, stuff like that you just can't do with customers around for liability reasons. And then lastly, I'll say in terms of advantages that if you think about from an inventory management perspective, when you have dueling systems of in-store customers and then also pickup orders, which all, traditional grocery stores now have, the difference between the dynamics of those two inventory systems clash and lead to inaccuracies and data latency. So if I'm, doing an online order and it says that there are 2 cans of beans left on the shelf, the inventory system in store may have not caught up with that because those 2 cans of beans are in someone's cart as they're continuing to shop and they have not checked out yet. So again, it's just sort of a data latency issue of those dueling systems. So when you add it all up, there are a lot of just sort of logistical and cost advantages of doing this. But in fairness, there are also some disadvantages that we see here. One of them being, is the world ready for that? Consumer habits are hard to change. And this makes a lot of sense. In fairness, it makes a lot of sense. And there has been some consumer acclamation during the pandemic when everyone sort of got comfortable, or a lot of people got comfortable doing that. So it has that going for it. But does it work for things like perishables. Like anything with a barcode, CPG products, fine. But are you going to buy your strawberries in an online cart? That's still a question mark. And I think that there are a lot of behavioral economics and sort of consumer psychology aspects to this that are going to be required to sort of test it in practice. So this is going to be something we're going to have to watch. So again, a lot of benefits on paper, but a lot of sort of, I don't know, X factors about the psychology of shopping for your produce online and stuff like that. So it's going to be something we're going to continue to watch. This company Addie's in closing, it's going to expand its footprint with this 10 million in new funding. Its eventual target is 2,000 locations, but it's going to use the money now to sort of staff up. It needs floor associates, it needs executives, it's working on its technological systems, and it's going to launch in 2023, and we're going to be watching it closely.
Okay, Mike, I have a lot of thoughts on this.
Right.
I mean, during the pandemic, where I live anyway, the grocery store was one of the few places you could actually enter, you
Yeah.
had to wear a mask and all that stuff. That was fine. But, some restaurants at different times were open, with very strict protocols, but you could always go to the grocery store. And historically, I've always kind of enjoyed going to the grocery store. That's just a, sample of one comment right there.
Yep.
So I have some questions about whether this is a customer experience that customers are clamoring for right now.
Right.
And I'm wondering if we can look at the trajectory of Instacart as a proxy for what the prospects for this business is. I know there's some key differences here, but there's some parallels too.
I think that is a good proxy. And I think that it's going to be consumer dependent. I mean, some people, you're a good example, like to treat that as like a pastime, whether it be unwinding from your day, whether it be a social thing, being around people. It's funny, in San Francisco, there was this famous Safeway in the Marina District that was kind of known colloquially as Dateway, because it was like just the
and meeting over like the avocados. Is this avocado fresh? Yes.
Yeah.
Very, yeah.
Are those melons you're holding? All kinds of
meeting cute in produce is like an old.
Yeah. But anyway,
meme.
It was known on Tuesday night that if you're single, you go do your shopping there. And it's like the produce section is like the most happening pickup joint in town. So anyway, that's an extreme example, but you bring up a good point that it is a social experience. Now, for me, I'm the opposite. I hate just the time it takes to go to the grocery store. I'm actually the antithesis of that concern about buying your strawberries. And to me, that trade-off is worth the time savings. I do a weekly order. I go drive up, pick it up. It's like door to door. I'm back in less than 30 minutes. And that's the value I put on it. So everyone's really different in that respect, I think.
So you're their customer. I am not.
I'm Addie's customer. Yeah.
Okay.
But the question is, are there enough of me out there? Is that an addressable market that's substantial? And that question still needs to be answered.
That is my big question.
Sure they've done. Yeah, they may have done some due diligence and market survey, consumer survey research to figure out, is this a big enough market? They probably had to demonstrate that to the firms, which were reputable VC firms. I don't have the list in front of me, but those who invested in it, of course, had to see that TAM data before they invested. So, I think that we can assume that market is substantial enough for them to have landed the funding and to have launched this whole thing. But yeah, and it's also probably geographic. Again, Norwood, Massachusetts. I'm not sure where that is, or if it's close to Boston, or
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I would think that it's sort of an urban persona that might be more into that sort of on-demand pickup sort of experience. And as a former urban city dweller in San Francisco, I can say that because it's just such a pain in the butt to go to the grocery store on top of the time. It's, there's no parking, there's all these other things. Whereas right now I'm in more of an suburban environment, and, you get in your car, you got this land of plenty in terms of parking. So I think it's situationally dependent on consumer personas and geography, but we'll see how that works. Like I said, it's going to be sort of a live market experiment to watch closely.
Yeah, quickly. Your point about the investors is interesting. I think they probably, if you want data, you can find the data, right? So they probably ginned up something that maybe that's unfair to put it that way, but something was there to validate the TAM. And I think what got their eyes looking like saucers was the automation piece.
Yeah. The margins. I mean, it's
Mhm.
again on paper when you look at the potential, operating margins as opposed to all those costs involved, all those overhead costs involved in like just having customers in the store. It's just such a large cost component.
Right. You can see this being optimized over and over. But if the
Yeah,
customers
yeah.
aren't
And
there, it's not going to fly. You know.
investors do like unit economics, and that's what
Yeah,
this was sold up probably on that factor.
I'm sure. I am sure.
Yeah.
Okay, Mike. So I think we'll take a quick break here and then come back for more.
Hi everyone, it's Mike Boland, Senior Analyst at Localogy, here to tell you about L23. It's our annual flagship event, held this year in sunny San Diego, Coronado Bay to be exact, and it's all about charting the course of local commerce and tackling all of the factors and topics that continue to impact the business of local media, advertising, and commerce. So we've got a solid speaker lineup already, and we'd love to see you in Coronado Bay, April 17th through 19th, and you can find out more at localogy.com. Now back to our episode.
Okay, we're back. Okay, Mike, that was really interesting. And I think we could talk about that whole, automating the grocery experience for an entire long podcast, but we'll pivot to a couple of things I wanted to mention today. One was, I'm not saying this is going to be a regular segment, but I've noticed in the last few days some pretty familiar names in the industry, at least for those who go to all the shows, right? Have moved on to interesting new roles, and I just want to acknowledge a couple of them. One is George Leith, who I think anyone who's kind of been to a conference in this world has crossed paths with George, big time sales guy, sales guru, Vendasta's CRO and Chief Customer Officer, who's actually just left Vendasta, and he's now EVP and managing partner of Harvard Media, which I believe is a radio group. I hope I'm not wrong about that. Just want to offer an acknowledgement there. The other one I wanted to mention is Luis Baptiste Coelho, who's based in Europe, and he was the executive vice president and head of global partnerships for Yext. He actually recently left. Now he's president and CRO of a company called Leadzai, which is based in Portugal. So, a couple big names have made big moves. I just wanted to acknowledge that. The thing I kind of wanted to kick around for fun today, again, we've talked a lot about AI. Apologies if people are sick of that topic, but I think it's still a fun topic. And something that I've seen lately that I think is fun and interesting and might produce a lot more in the near future is this notion of AI transparency. And what I mean by that is we've seen a couple things pop up recently. One is called GPT-0. And it was something that a Princeton computer science student named Edward Tian, hope I pronounced that correctly, Edward, sorry if I didn't. He was in a class in Princeton. I saw this on, I think it was CNBC or something, and then I looked it up a little bit. He basically wrote an app in class on how to tell if something was written by a bot, an AI bot or not. And I think where the use case he was imagining, and I think the early use case for this is, I'm a professor, and I want to know if my students are cheating using ChatGPT or something like that. And he created an app that sort of, is a BS meter for AI-driven plagiarism. Okay. And I think OpenAI has just released or announced a very similar product. So what I'm wondering is, as soon as AI plagiarism becomes a problem, a whole industry is created to combat that problem. And I think that's kind of fun. That's kind of funny. AI, ChatGPT is creating all these opportunities. It's also creating a few challenges. And the particular one that everyone's talking about, at least in the early days, is plagiarism in academia. I think if there's plagiarism in academia, there's going to be plagiarism in other places too. And I'm wondering how big a problem that's going to be and how much of an industry this transparency technology is going to be. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Mike.
Yeah, well, the transparency point is key. But first of all, Edward Tiang sounds like he's not going to be very popular among his peers and classmates.
I don't think he cares.
Pulled away the ability for them to, cheat on the test or plagiarize. He sounds like the kind of guy that reminds the teacher that they forgot to give him homework. No, just kidding. I think this is valuable. I think that one of the objections, one of many objections to a lot of the sort of AI advancements, which have certainly accelerated in the past 6 months, is this idea of authenticity. And I think that as long as there is full transparency to the thing you are looking at, whether it's like a DALL-E generated image or whether it is a, research paper, that it was indeed written by AI. At this point, I think like when it gets good, it's going to need this. At this point, I think in a lot of cases you can tell. A lot of the sort of chat GPT generated content, some of it very comical, is like impressive in that it could put it together, but it's just there's something off about it. And there's been a lot of sort of fact checking backlash to a lot of that we've talked about. So I think that when it gets good enough to actually fool people, which we're close to, it's going to need this because I think it addresses a concern. That concern sort of stands in the way of adoption. So once it eases that concern, I think its path to adoption is greater when it's just there's greater transparency on the table.
I think the question I have about this is one I can't answer, and I don't know if anyone can, is when ChatGPT can fool. I mean, because right now it's sort of like something written by somebody whose first language is not English, but they tried really hard to write in a native cadence and all that, but they don't quite nail it, And
yeah.
When ChatGPT does nail that, will it also be able to fool the transparency apps?
Yeah, and that gets into the
that
gets to the question of the actual mechanism being used by this sort of transparency signal that Edward Tiang invented, and it also. So I'm curious how it works. I mean, is it sort of embedded in the HTML of the copy of the words, or is it something that like? And how is that cross-platform on where the thing is going to show up? Is his algorithm going to be compatible wherever that piece of content shows up? So I have definitely some technical questions there, and and
I don't have the answers. Unfortunately, I've just I've skimmed this. I watched them interviewed, and he certainly wasn't asked that question for the viewers
But
of CNBC.
you mentioned that OpenAI is preempting this concern and actually I think it has to be native to the platform itself for it to for that transparency flag to sort of travel wherever the content itself does and not be sort of a third party thing. Just in terms of compatibility. But overall, at a high level, that concern aside, I think this is a good step, and I think a necessary step, because OpenAI, they're smart. Sam Altman's smart. He sees the sort of objections to this technology, and this is one way to address that objection is to
I think again, I don't know what his thinking was, but my guess is there's a combination of, I'll use a pretty imprecise analogy. Remember, I'm not a big MMA mixed martial arts fan. I don't watch it generally, but I'm familiar with it. And I know that when it first came out, John McCain, the late Senator John McCain, referred to it as human cockfighting. And I think it was a pretty apt description at the time.
Yeah.
And I think what they realized is that for this thing to become a popular sport, they need to regulate it rather than wait for somebody to come along and regulate it. So they applied rules like you can't, kill somebody in the ring.
Yeah.
Or at least,
can't use a broken beer bottle.
No stabbing, or whatever the rules were. They applied some regulation to it in order for it to get accepted. Now,
it's a preemptive action.
Yes.
That's smart.
So I think what OpenAI is doing is a preemptive action. My first impulse was they saw this bot that Princeton kid did, and they wanted to, mute that. I don't think that's what it is. That might be a part of it. I don't know. But I think what it is more what you said, which is, okay, these objections, they're out there. They're not invalid. I think at least in the early stages of this, let's own this.
Get ahead of it.
Yeah. Let's get ahead of it. I think that's what it was. Okay, Mike. I mean, we could probably, I think we can talk AI all the time. We can talk about a lot of things, but I think we're going to make this a quick one today. I think this is a good point to pause or to call it a day. Do you want to read us out?
Sure. Thanks, everyone, for listening. This has been This Week in Local. This episode was brought to you by L23, Localogy's flagship event taking place this year in San Diego, April 17th through 19th. And you can find out more at localogy.com. And stay tuned every week for more episodes of This Week in Local. You can find the show on all major podcast networks. Please subscribe, like, and comment. So I'm Mike Boland with Charles Laughlin. Thanks for listening and see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Localogy's This Week in Local with Mike Boland and Charles Laughlin. Be sure to subscribe for more.